Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for showing up this morning to officially welcome back Kelly Krauskopf as the President of Basketball Business Operations for the Indiana Fever.
What if the story unfolding around the Indiana Fever and Caitlin Clark is not just another breakout sports era, but something far bigger, something that is actively reshaping how an entire league understands fame, pressure, and power in real time? Because when Caitlin Clark entered the WNBA, she didn't just bring talent. She brought a global spotlight that instantly turned Indiana from a struggling franchise into the center of the basketball universe. And that sudden transformation created a chain reaction that nobody inside or outside the organization could fully prepare for, because almost overnight, every single game became a headline, every quote became a debate, and every decision, no matter how small, started to carry national weight. And as the attention grew, so did the expectations, not just for performance, but for identity. Because fans didn't just want Indiana to win, they wanted Indiana to represent something historic, something revolutionary, something that justified the level of attention now attached to it. And that's where the deeper tension begins, because according to ongoing fan discussions, media interpretation, and widespread speculation online, the Fever are now operating inside two overlapping realities at the same time, one where they are a basketball team trying to build chemistry and consistency, and another where they are a cultural phenomenon being measured like a global brand. And that dual identity creates constant friction in perception. Because when the team wins, it is framed as dominance fueled by a generational superstar, and when the team struggles, it is framed as dependency or instability. And that swing in narrative has made Indiana one of the most intensely analyzed teams in modern women's sports history. But the real question that keeps coming up again and again is not just about wins and losses, it is about structure. Because the presence of a player like Caitlin Clark forces every organization-level decision into a spotlight that most franchises never experience, and that includes roster construction, coaching strategy, media handling, and long-term planning. All of which suddenly feel like they are part of a much larger story about what the future of women's basketball should look like. And as that pressure builds, rumors and speculation across social platforms have suggested that internal conversations within the franchise may revolve around balancing short-term star-driven success with long-term sustainability, meaning how do you build a system that maximizes the impact of a player like Clark while also ensuring the team remains competitive and stable even when she is off the floor? And that question becomes even more complicated when you consider how dramatically the league environment has shifted around Indiana, because opponents are no longer just preparing for a game, they are preparing for an event. And every matchup against the Fever carries an emotional intensity that goes beyond normal competition, fueled by media coverage, fan engagement, and the sheer visibility of Clark's presence, and that has led to constant debate about whether the league is adjusting too quickly or not quickly enough to this new reality. Because some argue that the Fever have become the face of a new era in women's basketball, while others believe the pressure surrounding the team is unlike anything the league has ever managed before, and meanwhile the performance swings during games where Clark is limited or unavailable have only intensified that conversation. Because what makes this entire situation even more complex is that the conversation is no longer just about one team improving or one player elevating a franchise. It has expanded into a full-scale transformation of how modern women's basketball is consumed, analyzed, and valued. With the Indiana Fever and Caitlin Clark now sitting at the center of a shifting ecosystem where every game is no longer just a sporting event, but a media product, a cultural moment, and a business indicator all at the same time, and that layering of meaning is exactly what makes this era so difficult to define, because depending on who you ask, it is either the beginning of a golden age or the start of an unpredictable transition where expectations are rising faster than any system can realistically stabilize. And that tension is constantly visible in how people interpret even the smallest developments, because a single lineup change can become a debate about strategy, a single quote can become a headline about philosophy, and a single performance can shift narratives across entire fan communities in a matter of hours, creating a level of intensity that very few franchises in any sport ever experience. let alone sustain over multiple seasons. And as that intensity grows, so does the pressure on everyone involved, because now it is not just about winning games, but about managing perception, expectation, and identity simultaneously, which is a far more complicated challenge than anything that exists on the court itself. And that is where the deeper story begins to take shape, because behind all the viral moments and highlight clips, there is a constant process of adjustment happening within the team environment, where players are trying to find consistency in rotations, trust in roles, and rhythm in systems that are constantly being evaluated from the outside world. And that kind of environment naturally creates a contrast between what fans think is happening and what is actually happening inside the locker room. Because externally, the narrative often swings between extremes, either complete dominance or complete instability, while internally the reality is far more gradual, built on small improvements, communication, and the daily grind of professional basketball under extreme visibility. And that gap between perception and reality is exactly what fuels so much of the ongoing fascination, because the less people know for certain, the more they speculate, and the more they speculate, the bigger the story becomes. And at the organizational level, this cycle is even more amplified, because leadership is not only responding to performance, but also to a constant wave of attention that influences how every decision is interpreted, from roster moves to development plans to long-term investments in infrastructure, all of which are now viewed through a lens of whether they support a superstar-driven era or a broader franchise identity that must endure beyond any single player. And that creates a unique tension that most teams never face, because most franchises are either building for the future or competing in the present. But Indiana is being forced to do both at the same time under a global spotlight that never really turns off. And that is where the idea of sustainability becomes just as important as success, because attention can elevate a franchise overnight, but only structure, depth, and adaptability can keep it stable when that attention inevitably shifts or fluctuates. And this is why so many discussions around Indiana now go beyond basketball tactics and enter the realm of long-term sports evolution. Because what is happening here feels less like a standard rebuild and more like a case study in how modern sports ecosystems react when a single athlete becomes the center of global interest, drawing in new audiences, reshaping media coverage, and redefining expectations not just for one team, but for an entire league. And as that transformation continues, uncertainty becomes part of the story itself, because nobody can fully predict how long this level of attention will last, how it will evolve, or what structures will be needed to support it in the future. And yet every game still adds another piece to that puzzle. Every season adds another layer of interpretation, and every decision becomes part of a larger narrative that stretches far beyond the present moment, making this not just a basketball story, but an ongoing shift in how sports, fame, and competition intersect in the modern era, where Indiana is no longer simply participating in the league, but actively influencing its direction, its visibility, and its future identity in ways that are still unfolding in real time.